Starting at step 4, I've gathered my images. I've chosen the one I want to draw really large on my piece of paper. I would suggest drawing very lightly because you'll want to overlap images and be able to erase the pencil. I've done mine a little bit darker just so that you can see it. So I've got my one really large image that covers about half of my page. Now I'm beginning to add other images. I chose a palette, by the way, and a paintbrush because art, of course, is very important to me, big part of my life. So I'm just sketching out, and you'll notice I drew the paintbrush over the palette, but I want to show you in a minute how that paintbrush is going to look like it's going through the hole in the palette, simply by erasing the part of the palette that would be hidden by the paintbrush. And that's one advantage of drawing really, really lightly with your pencil. You can take pencil off. That's not necessary. You can make changes more easily. So that's always a good first step, to draw very lightly with your pencil. Once I have the main images done, then begin to add other images. This is a drawing of a house I lived in when I lived in St. Louis with my family. I remember that house quite well. And you'll notice I'm drawing it smaller back in the back. This is a basketball. On that side of the house, we had a basketball court. And I used to play ball with my big brother. This is a little church that we went to. One of the big things I liked to do as a teenager was travel to St. Louis and attend lots of different music concerts. So that's a fond memory I have of being there. So there's the guitar and the Gateway to the West, I believe they call it, which is located in St. Louis. It's a huge sculpture. So here I'm drawing just a little tiny person hanging on for dear life to the paintbrush. And this is a bowl of cereal. I remember as a child eating lots and lots of Cheerios. Inside the cereal bowl, that's a sailboat that my dad had, and we spent a lot of great times with that sailboat on Lake Martin. So again, here are the Cheerios. And the idea that the sailboat is floating in the bowl of Cheerios is, again, that playing around with size proportions and things that couldn't really happen, but just makes it more interesting and fun. If you want to trace an image, like the Randolph symbol or your favorite sport team symbol, you can do that just by putting it up to a window. You can see through the glass and trace. And here, if you want a perfect circle, just use something the right size, and again, you can trace it. So I have most of my images ready, so I'm going to add my quote. And I think putting it along the top edge here, not right in the very middle, but following this curve of the palette that I drew, will help pull the viewer's eye into the composition. And there I am on a sled sliding down the palette. We used to go sledding when I lived in Canada. A lot of fun. So I like to write the quote in pencil first, just in case I misspell something or I need to fix something. I can always go over it with the marker later. And that's what's next. Get your marker and just start outlining. Just be careful not to go over something or over a line that you don't want or don't need. Just do that carefully. If you want anything colored black, it's really best to do that with your Sharpie. So you could use the bigger Sharpie or the little one. In my case, I'm going to color in the little guy hanging on to the paintbrush. So I'm just going to use my skinny Sharpie and fill him in more of as a shadow figure. So I'm finishing up the last part of the outlining. And then there's a lot of pencil left over, so I'm going to erase all the pencil. You want your work to be neat. So erase any of the pencil marks that are left behind. And then you're ready to paint. You'll need some water, brushes, paper towel, and then your watercolor pencils. Now I'd suggest playing around with the color pencils before you start, just to get used to how they work. If you apply them softly and then you just add water, brush over it, that turns the watercolor pencil into a watercolor wash that then you can move and use it to fill in other spaces. Now, because I use the three colors next to each other, they work well. When I use opposite colors like yellow and violet, they tend to dull each other down, and it may not be what you want. So use that tester sheet to test things before you put them on your actual work. So I'm ready to go. I'm going to use the three colors next to each other on the color wheel for the background behind my buildings. You can use the side of the color pencil. I'm not being really super careful about getting it in because I know I want this very light and transparent. So I'm just going over with the side of the pencils. And I'm going to gradually go from yellows to oranges to reds and then into blues and violets. Just a light application. I'm not pressing hard with my pencil. Then the water. I'm going to go slowly next to my buildings and next to my images, but then a little bit looser as I move up. And again, I wanted this area to be light and transparent, not really super dark. So these watercolor pencils work just great for that. It also helps fill in any white spaces that you left when you were coloring. Gives it a nice watercolor feel. Now I need to let the areas next to it dry, so I'm going to move into the building, my house. And it was green, but I know I don't want it just flat green. I want to enrich it with maybe some shadows of blue underneath the roof, maybe a little blue on the windows. Then same thing, water, and carefully apply it. And if you turn your brush different ways, you can use the tip, the side, and that way you can control where the water is going. If you need to rinse your brush out for cleaner water, that's always a good idea. Oh, and if you want something black, again, you can just use your Sharpie and fill it in black. The contrast is really nice to have that dark black against this watery color feel. Now I want the basketball to really show up, so I'm going to apply the color pencils in a really heavy pressure. You can already tell it's going to contrast with the background. And again, don't just use a flat color. Blend in some others into it. The red to make a little darker area. Yellow to make a brighter area. And then even some blue or violet to make shadowed areas. Forgot that little spot. But again, the water is going to blend the color pencil and just really make a nice effect. But it's a darker application. So it's good to have some areas that are dark and some that are light. Now for these bushes, I wanted to make a yellow-green, but I didn't have a yellow-green pencil. So if you use your yellow and add some green on top of it, you can add it with a lot of pressure where the shadows might be, and then lighter where the light is hitting, or where you want it to blend with the yellow to make that yellow-green. And there it is. It blends and makes a nice bright yellow-green. Some nice contrast for that area. And here's one that I've been working on earlier to show you what it's going to look like, hopefully. So keep working.